Yes, the world has always been fascinated by Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, a man whose voice electrified a generation and whose image became immortal. But for every screaming crowd, every glittering stage light, there were quiet corridors and late-night whispers where the real Elvis existed. Tonight, you'll hear that private story. For the first time in decades, one of the men who guarded Elvis with his own life is finally ready to talk. Now 81 years old, he speaks not as a gossip or opportunist, but as someone who walked side by side with the king, shielded him from frenzied fans, and witnessed moments the public never imagined. He kept those memories locked away for years, out of loyalty, out of respect, and perhaps out of grief. But time has a way of reshaping silence. And now, after more than 4 decades, he's ready to reveal what it was really like to stand beside Elvis Presley when the cameras were off and the music stopped. His story begins long before flashing bulbs and screaming crowds. Born in a small southern town, he was raised on discipline and hard work. By his early 20s, he had served in the military and trained in personal security, skills that would eventually lead him to the gates of Graceland. He still remembers the first time he met Elvis. It was a warm Memphis afternoon in the mid-1960s. Graceland's gates opened, and there stood the king himself, charismatic, welcoming, but surprisingly down to earth. Elvis extended his hand, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "I hear you can keep a man safe. Think you can handle a little chaos?" That handshake began a relationship that would define the next decade of his life. From that day forward, he was part of an inner circle charged with an impossible mission: keep Elvis Presley safe from the endless wave of fans, photographers, and opportunists, and sometimes from his own restless spirit. In those early years, Elvis was already a legend. His records topped the charts, his films drew massive crowds, and his stage presence could ignite a room like lightning striking dry wood. But the Bodyguard quickly realized that fame was both a blessing and a cage. He recalls the first major tour he worked. Cities blurred together. Each night a new hotel, a new arena, a new crowd of screaming admirers. Security was intense. Fans would camp outside hotels, scale fences, even hide in service corridors. His job was to anticipate every possible risk, to scan each room before Elvis entered, to check exits, to stay alert during every performance. But in quieter moments, when the music stopped and the fans were miles away, the king would reveal a gentler side. Elvis loved to talk late at night, often inviting the Bodyguard to share coffee or play cards in a hotel suite. They would sit for hours as Elvis spoke of music, faith, and the pressure of carrying a legend's mantle. One evening in a Nashville hotel, Elvis turned to him and said, "You know, sometimes I wonder if people love me or just the idea of me. The music, that's real. But the rest? Maybe it's just smoke." The Bodyguard sensed the weight behind those words. Elvis was surrounded by adoration, but he also longed for genuine connection. The fame that had made him a global icon sometimes left him isolated. Over the years, their professional relationship deepened into something more like friendship. The Bodyguard saw Elvis as a man who could be playful and mischievous, organizing late-night football games on hotel lawns, or deeply introspective, retreating to private rooms with a Bible or a stack of spiritual books. Graceland itself became both fortress and sanctuary. The Bodyguard remembers the creak of the grand staircase, the scent of polished wood, the sound of Elvis's laughter echoing through the halls. Yet even there, privacy was fleeting. Fans gathered at the gates day and night, desperate for a glimpse. Security duty wasn't without danger. Overzealous admirers sometimes tried to break in. There were frantic moments at airports when crowds surged unexpectedly, forcing the team to form a protective circle around Elvis as they rushed him to safety. The Bodyguard recalls one night in Chicago when a barrier collapsed under the weight of fans, sending dozens tumbling forward. He and the team pushed back, shielding Elvis until order was restored. Despite these challenges, Elvis often insisted on mingling with the public in small ways. He would roll down car windows to wave, stop to sign autographs, or hand out scarves during performances, gestures that thrilled fans but made security nervous. The Bodyguard also witnessed Elvis's quiet generosity. He remembers late-night shopping trips where Elvis would buy expensive jewelry not for himself, but to give to staff members or strangers he met along the way. He had a heart bigger than any stage, the bodyguard recalls. He loved surprising people with kindness, but the demands of fame weighed heavily. Endless tours, grueling schedules, and the constant expectation to deliver perfection took their toll. Elvis often pushed himself beyond exhaustion. The bodyguard remembers nights when the king would return to his suite pale and drained, yet still greet everyone with a smile. During these years, Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, was a powerful presence. Parker's influence over Elvis's career was absolute, and tensions sometimes flared between Parker's ambitions and Elvis's well-being. The bodyguard observed these dynamics carefully, knowing that business decisions often overshadowed personal needs. Through it all, he remained vigilant, watching, protecting, and quietly absorbing the private moments that would one day form this very story. Now, as he speaks decades later, the memories return vividly. The roar of the crowd, the soft strum of Elvis's guitar during quiet rehearsals, the smell of stage lights warming the air. He remembers Elvis as both legend and man, charismatic yet vulnerable, larger than life yet strikingly human. And tonight, he's ready to share it all. The triumphs, the trials, and the truths that only someone inside the king's inner circle could know. Life on tour and early years with Elvis touring with Elvis Presley was unlike anything the bodyguard had ever experienced. From the very first national tours, it became clear that life on the road with the king was a whirlwind of chaos, brilliance, and constant unpredictability. Each city held its own energy, each venue its own challenges, and every performance demanded perfection, not just from Elvis, but from everyone who supported him. The early years were especially intense. Elvis was at the height of his popularity, and every movement was scrutinized. The bodyguard recalls stepping off the bus in a small town and immediately being greeted by a mass of fans who had heard he was coming. The screams, the excitement, and the sheer force of the crowd were unlike anything he had imagined. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once, he said. One wrong move and someone could get hurt, or worse, Elvis could be in danger. Yet even in the midst of such chaos, Elvis carried himself with a calm charisma. Fans remember the bright lights, the sequined suits, and the electrifying performances, but the bodyguard had a front-row view of the man behind the legend. He describes Elvis pacing backstage before shows, quietly running through notes and lyrics, sometimes humming to himself, other times sitting alone in silence. These were moments of preparation, reflection, and sometimes anxiety. The bodyguard shares a vivid memory of a concert in Memphis, where the crowd was so packed that security could barely maneuver. Elvis had been performing tirelessly, yet he insisted on taking time after the show to meet fans, sign autographs, and shake hands. He never wanted to disappoint the people who loved him, the bodyguard explains. Even when he was exhausted, he gave everything he had. Life on tour wasn't just about performances. It was about constant travel, navigating airports, hotels, and restaurants, and dealing with the endless demands of fans and media. The bodyguard remembers long drives between cities, watching Elvis in moments of quiet reflection, sometimes staring out the window at passing landscapes, lost in thought. These drives, though tedious for others, were precious to Elvis, a time to decompress and gather his energy for the next stage. Early mornings were filled with rehearsals, meetings with managers, and planning sessions for upcoming shows. Even at this stage, Elvis had an extraordinary work ethic, pushing himself to rehearse for hours, often perfecting minor details that most people wouldn't even notice. The bodyguard recalls seeing him adjust his posture, his hand gestures, and even his facial expressions, all in service of creating the perfect connection with his audience. The bodyguard also witnessed Elvis's lighter side. On tour, there were moments of mischief and playfulness. He recalls one night in Las Vegas when Elvis decided to sneak into a nearby diner after a late show. Disguised with sunglasses and a scarf, he sat at a corner booth, laughing quietly as the staff tried to figure out who he was. Only the bodyguard knew, and they shared a private laugh. Elvis loved those little adventures, he said. They reminded him that he was still a regular guy, even if the world saw him as larger than life. But touring was not without its dangers. Fans could become uncontrollable, and the energy of a live audience could turn overwhelming in seconds. The Bodyguard recounts incidents where fans climbed fences, broke barriers, and even rushed the stage. "I had to make split-second decisions," he recalls. "One wrong move and someone could get hurt. But Elvis trusted me to keep him safe, and I never let him down." Despite the pressure, Elvis remained generous with his time and attention. The Bodyguard tells of small towns where Elvis would spend hours signing autographs for children, visiting local schools, or simply taking a walk through town unnoticed. These acts of kindness were not publicized. They were done purely out of love for people, a way for Elvis to connect with the world beyond the stage lights. Backstage, the atmosphere could be electric or tense, depending on the night. The Bodyguard remembers watching Elvis prepare for shows, sometimes joking with the band, other times quietly concentrating, headphones in, lost in the rhythm of a new song. These private moments were revealing. They showed Elvis as a perfectionist, deeply committed to his craft, and profoundly aware of the fleeting nature of performance. The Bodyguard also witnessed the evolution of Elvis's style and persona. Early in his career, he had a raw energy, an almost rebellious charm that drew teenagers across the country to record stores and dance halls. As he matured, his performances became more refined, with a focus on nuance, emotion, and storytelling. He learned to balance the spectacle with subtlety, the flash with sincerity. Elvis was always learning, the Bodyguard said. He wanted to grow, to improve, to give the best version of himself every night. Traveling from city to city also exposed him to the pressures of fame in unexpected ways. Hotel rooms were often overrun by reporters and photographers, making privacy a rare commodity. The Bodyguard remembers instances when he had to negotiate with aggressive paparazzi, sometimes physically standing in the way to protect Elvis's personal space. These moments were stressful but necessary. He knew that preserving Elvis's peace of mind was critical for his well-being. There were also quiet, reflective moments that revealed Elvis's deeper side. He would sometimes play the piano late at night, experimenting with chords and melodies in private. The Bodyguard recalls sitting nearby, listening to new compositions, feeling privileged to hear them before anyone else. He didn't do it for the cameras or the crowd, he said. He did it because it was who he was. Music was his sanctuary. On tour, Elvis's personality shone in unexpected ways. He was generous, humble, and often surprisingly witty. The Bodyguard shares a story from a New Orleans performance where Elvis charmed a group of local children with jokes and playful antics, keeping them entertained for over an hour. "Even in chaos, he made people feel special," the Bodyguard said. That was Elvis, always thinking of others even when exhausted. The rigorous schedule, however, did take its toll. Nights of endless travel, repeated performances, and the constant glare of the spotlight were exhausting. Elvis sometimes struggled with sleep, relying on brief naps during long bus rides. The Bodyguard recalls one night in Atlanta where Elvis fell asleep mid-conversation, only to wake suddenly, apologize with a sheepish grin, and continue planning the next day's performance. He never wanted to let anyone down, the Bodyguard remembered. Even when he was tired, he gave everything. These experiences shaped the Bodyguard's understanding of who Elvis really was. Beyond the sequins and the music, he saw a man of discipline, humor, generosity, and vulnerability. Touring with the King was more than a job. It was an immersion into a world of constant excitement, immense pressure, and profound humanity. Through it all, the Bodyguard learned to anticipate not just the physical risks, but the emotional ones as well. Elvis was surrounded by adoration and admiration, but he also faced loneliness, fear, and doubt. The Bodyguard's role became part protector, part confidant, part silent witness to the highs and lows of a man living under extraordinary circumstances. And yet, even amidst exhaustion and danger, Elvis found moments of joy. Whether it was joking with crew members, sharing a quiet drink with friends, or spontaneously dancing in a hotel hallway, he embraced life with energy and warmth. The Bodyguard recalls thinking, "No matter how famous he was, he never lost that spark. That spark is what made him the king." Touring with Elvis also revealed the man's resilience. Despite illness, exhaustion, and the relentless pace, he showed up for fans, ready to give his all. It wasn't about the money, the bodyguard explained. It was about connecting, about sharing something bigger than himself. In retrospect, these early touring years laid the foundation for understanding Elvis fully. To the world, he was a superstar. To the bodyguard, he was a man who loved deeply, worried quietly, and carried a world of responsibility on his shoulders. It was a life few could understand, and fewer still could survive. And for decades, this man, the bodyguard, carried the memory, the responsibility, and the untold stories of those early years. He kept silent out of loyalty, knowing that the public only ever saw a fraction of the truth. But now, decades later, he is finally ready to share these intimate, behind-the-scenes moments with the world, giving fans a chance to see the man behind the legend, step by step, city by city, night by night. Private conversations and personal struggles, touring with Elvis Presley exposed the bodyguard to the public spectacle, but it was in private conversations that the true character of the king emerged. Away from the flashing lights and roaring crowds, Elvis revealed his deepest thoughts, his insecurities, and his quiet struggles. The bodyguard recalls long nights in hotel suites. After performances, when Elvis would sit alone at the piano or in a corner chair, seemingly lost in thought, he would talk about fame, about the pressure to always perform, to always be perfect. "I feel like I'm living in a fishbowl," Elvis confided one evening. "Everything I do is watched, measured, judged, and yet no one knows me at all." It was in these moments that the bodyguard saw a vulnerability few ever imagined. Elvis was not merely a performer. He was a man grappling with the weight of expectation. He loved his fans deeply, but he also feared disappointing them. He wanted to be authentic, to express himself fully, yet the world demanded a carefully curated version of him. One night in Las Vegas, after an especially grueling performance, Elvis spoke candidly about his personal fears. He admitted that despite the glitz, the glamour, and the adoration, he often felt isolated. He missed genuine connection, the simplicity of ordinary life, the ability to walk through a town without being recognized. He longed for peace, for moments where he could simply be Elvis Presley, not the king of rock and roll. The bodyguard remembers the way Elvis would occasionally confide in him about family. He spoke with immense love for his parents, his grandmother, and extended family. He would share stories of childhood in Tupelo, of simple pleasures before fame transformed his world. He spoke fondly of his mother, Gladys, describing her love and influence as a guiding light throughout his life. "She kept me grounded," Elvis said. "Without her, I wouldn't be me." But private conversations were not only about nostalgia, they were about struggle. Elvis grappled with the toll of fame on his mental and physical health. He expressed frustration with the pressures imposed by management, especially Colonel Tom Parker. Parker's relentless focus on profit often conflicted with Elvis's personal desires and well-being. "I want to slow down," Elvis once said. "I want to live without schedules dictating every breath." But they don't listen. The bodyguard witnessed the emotional toll firsthand. He remembers nights when Elvis would pace in his hotel room, phone in hand, wrestling with anxiety and doubt. Sometimes he would confide fears about losing his voice, about aging, about being forgotten. These moments were rare glimpses into the man behind the persona, someone burdened by responsibility, yet striving to maintain joy and connection. In addition to mental struggles, physical exhaustion was a constant companion. Tours were relentless, with long drives, back-to-back performances, and demanding schedules. Elvis would often push himself beyond fatigue, fueled by adrenaline and the desire to give fans everything he had. The bodyguard recalls times when Elvis collapsed into chairs after shows, drenched in sweat, breathing heavily, yet still smiling at those around him. He never wanted anyone to see weakness, the bodyguard said. He carried it all inside. Private struggles also extended to personal relationships. Elvis had close friends and confidants, but trust was scarce. The bodyguard explains that people often approached him for favors, money, or influence, and Elvis had to navigate these requests carefully. The line between genuine friendship and opportunism was thin, and the king learned early to protect his heart. Yet, in those quiet conversations, the bodyguard observed a deeply caring and generous man. Elvis often expressed concern for others, his staff, friends, and even strangers. He spoke of wanting to give back, to make a difference, to leave the world better than he found it. These sentiments were heartfelt, not for show. He also shared personal doubts and fears about mortality. Elvis was acutely aware of the fleeting nature of life, and he sometimes pondered what legacy he would leave. "I don't want to be remembered for clothes or gimmicks," he confided. "I want my music, my soul, the things that matter." The bodyguard recalls feeling humbled by the honesty and depth of these reflections. The private moments were often punctuated by laughter, too. Elvis had a mischievous, playful side, delighting in jokes, pranks, and playful antics with his inner circle. The bodyguard recalls a night in Chicago when Elvis rearranged hotel furniture in the hallway just to see the reaction of staff walking by. Laughter, he said, was essential, a release from the constant weight of expectation. But amidst humor, there were also heartbreaks. Elvis endured betrayals, disappointments, and the loneliness that accompanies fame. He confided in the bodyguard about friendships that soured, business decisions that hurt him, and the relentless scrutiny of the press. The bodyguard explains that these moments revealed the king's vulnerability, a reminder that beneath the sequins and spotlight was a human being with emotions, fears, and dreams. The bodyguard also recounts intimate details of Elvis's creative process. In private, he would experiment with music in ways the public never saw. He played with rhythms, harmonies, and lyrics, often scribbling ideas in notebooks or on scraps of paper. The bodyguard describes listening to Elvis hum quietly to himself late at night, capturing melodies that would never reach the audience. "It was a privilege to witness," he said. "He created magic not for fame, but for the joy of creation itself." Spirituality was another aspect of Elvis's private life. He often spoke about faith, morality, and the search for meaning. The bodyguard recalls Elvis reading the Bible, reflecting on passages, and expressing hope for guidance and peace. He believed in doing good, in loving others, in finding light even in darkness, the bodyguard explained. It was a side of him most people never saw. The combination of fame, responsibility, and personal struggle shaped Elvis profoundly. The bodyguard reflects on how these experiences forged resilience. Despite the pressures and challenges, Elvis continued to perform, to give, and to connect with the world. His music, energy, and charisma never waned. But the private moments revealed the complexity of the man behind the legend. Some of the most touching conversations involved family. Elvis expressed deep longing for normalcy, for time with loved ones, and concern for those around him. He worried about the impact of fame on relationships and sought comfort in the quiet presence of trusted friends, including his bodyguard. These moments were private, sacred, and unforgettable. The bodyguard recalls a particularly poignant evening in Las Vegas after a sold-out show. Elvis and he sat quietly on a balcony, overlooking the city lights. He spoke about the people he loved, the bodyguard remembers. He spoke about fear, hope, and the music that kept him alive. "That night, I saw the man, not the icon, and it changed my understanding forever." These private conversations also revealed the weight of responsibility Elvis carried. He felt accountable not only to his fans, but to his family, his team, and even his own standards. He worried about letting people down, about being misunderstood, and about the permanence of mistakes. The bodyguard emphasizes that this burden was constant, shaping decisions, moods, and interactions throughout his life. In moments of stress, Elvis found solace in simple routines. He enjoyed reading, listening to classical music, and reflecting on past experiences. The bodyguard describes how these routines provided balance, grounding the king amid the chaos of fame. Even as he juggled tours, recordings, and public appearances, these quiet rituals were essential for maintaining mental and emotional stability. The bodyguard also observed how Elvis coped with public scrutiny. Paparazzi, tabloid stories, and fan speculation were relentless, yet he managed these pressures with grace, humor, and occasional defiance. In private, he would express frustration. But he also maintained a remarkable ability to compartmentalize, focusing on what mattered most: his music, his fans, and those he loved. Through decades of service, the bodyguard realized that the private struggles were inseparable from the public triumphs. The king's vulnerability, introspection, and empathy informed every performance, every interaction, and every creative decision. These struggles shaped the man, the music, and the legacy that continues to inspire millions. Conflicts with Colonel Parker and management pressures. While touring and performing, Elvis Presley faced another formidable presence: Colonel Tom Parker, his manager. Parker was a man of immense influence and authority, and his control over Elvis's career was absolute. The bodyguard recalls that, from the beginning, Parker's decisions shaped every aspect of Elvis's professional life, from the choice of songs and movies to the scheduling of concerts and appearances. Parker was a master strategist, a man who understood the entertainment industry like few others. Yet the bodyguard observed early on that his strategies often conflicted with Elvis's personal well-being. Colonel Parker cared about one thing: revenue, the bodyguard recalls. Elvis was his golden goose, and the colonel never let anything stand in the way of profit. This dynamic created tension. Elvis wanted to focus on music, to create, to explore new artistic directions. Parker prioritized ticket sales, contracts, and branding, sometimes at the expense of Elvis's health and creative freedom. The bodyguard witnessed arguments and disagreements, subtle at first, then more pronounced as Elvis grew older and the pressures of fame intensified. One vivid memory involves a Vegas engagement in the early 1970s. Elvis had expressed a desire to take a break, to rest, and to spend time with family. Parker, however, insisted on a grueling schedule, threatening to cancel performances if Elvis resisted. The bodyguard recalls standing by as Elvis reluctantly agreed, the strain visible on his face. He wanted to please everyone, the bodyguard said. But deep down, he was exhausted, frustrated, and disappointed that he had so little control over his own life. The pressure wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Parker often leveraged Elvis's loyalty and trust, manipulating situations to ensure compliance. The bodyguard explains that this created a sense of confinement for Elvis. He was a superstar, adored by millions, yet at times he felt trapped, beholden to the colonel's demands. In private, Elvis confided to the bodyguard about his frustrations. "I feel like I'm living someone else's life," he said one evening. "I'm here performing, making people happy, but who am I really doing it for? Is it me or him?" The bodyguard recalls the sadness in his eyes, a rare glimpse into the inner conflict that weighed heavily on the king. Parker's influence extended beyond scheduling. He controlled film roles, merchandising, and even public appearances, carefully crafting an image of Elvis that would maximize financial gain. While this strategy brought immense success, it also stifled creativity. The bodyguard recounts instances when Elvis wanted to record new material, experiment with genres, or collaborate with unconventional artists, only to be overruled by the colonel. This tug-of-war between artistic ambition and managerial control caused friction. Elvis sometimes chafed against the rules, expressing private frustration and longing for independence. The bodyguard recalls late-night conversations where Elvis lamented being treated more like a commodity than a human being. He was brilliant, creative, and generous, the bodyguard said, but he was often boxed in by decisions made without his input. The tension also impacted those closest to Elvis. Friends, family, and staff observed the subtle stress, the quiet disappointment. The bodyguard explains that this was particularly difficult because Elvis valued loyalty, honesty, and connection. Yet he often had to navigate conflicts imposed by external forces, including the colonel's formidable presence. Financial pressures added another layer. Parker negotiated deals that were lucrative, but sometimes restrictive. Elvis's earnings were substantial, but contractual obligations tied him to constant touring and projects, leaving little room for rest or personal exploration. The bodyguard describes evenings when Elvis would silently review contracts, muttering under his breath, torn between desire for freedom and fear of disappointing those who depended on him. Despite these challenges, Elvis maintained professionalism. He rarely let frustration spill into public performances. Fans only saw energy, charisma, and perfection on stage. The Bodyguard emphasizes that this was no small feat. Elvis carried so much internally, he said, but he never let it interfere with the joy he gave to others. One particularly telling moment occurred during a contract negotiation for a film. Elvis wanted a role that challenged him artistically, exploring complex emotional themes. Parker rejected it outright, citing financial risk and potential public reception. The Bodyguard recalls Elvis walking away quietly, his disappointment palpable, yet he never complained publicly. He learned to smile through disappointment, the Bodyguard reflected. It became part of surviving in his world. The Bodyguard also recounts times when Parker's pressure inadvertently led to tension between Elvis and his support team. Crew members, tour managers, and even the Bodyguard himself sometimes had to mediate conflicts, protect Elvis from stress, or find creative solutions to logistical nightmares. These moments highlighted the delicate balance between management demands and personal loyalty. Yet Parker was not without his moments of brilliance. He recognized Elvis's extraordinary talent and understood the business landscape better than most. The Bodyguard acknowledges that Parker's strategies contributed to the King's global fame and financial success. However, the cost to personal freedom and creative exploration was undeniable. Elvis often expressed private longing for autonomy. "I want to make music my way," he confided. "I want to choose my roles, my songs, my schedule, but everyone seems to have a say except me." The Bodyguard recalls feeling conflicted, torn between supporting Elvis's artistic freedom and ensuring his safety under Parker's rigid system. These pressures intensified as Elvis's health began to wane. The relentless touring schedule, coupled with managerial expectations, exacerbated fatigue and stress. The Bodyguard observed how these external pressures contributed to physical and emotional strain, adding another layer to the King's already complex life. In addition to professional challenges, Parker's influence extended to personal relationships. He often dictated public appearances with family and friends, sometimes controlling access and limiting social interactions. The Bodyguard explains that this created frustration for Elvis, who valued genuine connections and sought moments of authenticity amidst the manufactured environment. Despite the challenges, Elvis remained devoted to his craft. Parker's control may have limited choices, but it did not diminish talent, creativity, or dedication. The Bodyguard emphasizes that Elvis's resilience, charisma, and humanity shone even under the weight of managerial pressure. There were also moments of private rebellion. Elvis occasionally circumvented Parker's authority, making small decisions independently or taking risks to pursue creative interests. These acts, though subtle, provided glimpses into his desire for self-expression and autonomy. The Bodyguard recounts a night in Las Vegas when Elvis quietly arranged a private jam session with local musicians, defying Parker's schedule. It was a moment of joy and freedom, brief but meaningful. The Bodyguard also witnessed Parker's sometimes controlling and manipulative nature, particularly regarding finances and publicity. He observed instances where Parker prioritized business over personal well-being, leading to tension and conflict. Yet Elvis rarely confronted Parker publicly, maintaining professionalism and decorum. Through these experiences, the Bodyguard gained insight into the delicate balance Elvis maintained between loyalty, artistry, and personal happiness. He understood that fame came with both opportunity and confinement, that genius often demanded sacrifice, and that the King's life was far more complex than most fans could imagine. He recalls a conversation from the mid-1970s. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone sees me for who I really am," Elvis said. "They see the show, the sequins, the music, but they don't see me, the man behind it all." The Bodyguard nodded, understanding intimately the weight of these words. For decades, he had witnessed both the brilliance and the burden, the triumphs and the trials, and now, finally, he was sharing them. Despite all the pressures from management, Colonel Parker, and the public, Elvis retained a remarkable generosity and empathy. The Bodyguard emphasizes that even under strain, the King cared deeply for those around him, ensuring his staff, friends, and family were supported and valued. The conflicts with Colonel Parker and the pressures of management were constant themes in Elvis's life, shaping his decisions, influencing his career trajectory, and impacting his personal well-being. Yet through it all, the king endured, creating timeless music, unforgettable performances, and a legacy that would last long after his passing. The Bodyguard reflects on this period with a mixture of admiration and sorrow. He witnessed brilliance constrained, freedom curtailed, and creativity challenged, but he also witnessed resilience, integrity, and humanity in its purest form. These stories reveal the man behind the myth, the human being behind the icon, and the personal struggles that shaped Elvis Presley's life. Health decline in final years as the 1970s progressed. Elvis Presley's physical and emotional health began to show signs of strain. The relentless touring schedule, coupled with the pressures of fame, management demands, and personal struggles, started taking a noticeable toll. The Bodyguard recalls watching the transformation firsthand, witnessing a man who, despite his larger-than-life persona, was increasingly vulnerable and fragile. The king's energy, once boundless and electrifying, became more erratic. Some nights he would deliver flawless, powerful performances, while others he struggled to maintain his usual vigor. The Bodyguard recalls particular evenings when Elvis seemed fatigued before even stepping onto the stage. "You could see it in his eyes," he said. He wanted to give everything, but his body was fighting him. Diet and medication also contributed to his decline. The Bodyguard observed that Elvis relied heavily on prescription medications to manage sleep, pain, and stress, a practice that, over time, affected both his physical health and mental clarity. While these medications offered temporary relief, they also contributed to fatigue, mood swings, and intermittent confusion. Despite these challenges, Elvis remained committed to his craft. He continued performing night after night, driven by a combination of passion, dedication, and the relentless expectation of his fans. The Bodyguard recalls driving between cities, watching him rehearse in hotel rooms, meticulously going over lyrics, notes, and choreography. Even when tired, he gave 100%, the Bodyguard said. He refused to let anyone down. Sleep became increasingly elusive. Long tours, late-night performances, and the constant spotlight disrupted rest, leaving Elvis physically drained. The Bodyguard explains that in private, Elvis often expressed frustration about his inability to rest fully. He longed for normalcy, for a quiet life where he could recharge, but the demands of fame offered no such respite. Health challenges extended beyond fatigue. Elvis experienced high blood pressure, digestive issues, and other medical complications that worsened over time. The Bodyguard recalls emergency visits to hospitals, consultations with doctors, and the constant monitoring of his physical condition. Yet, despite these interventions, Elvis often resisted slowing down. He was determined to keep going, the Bodyguard reflected. He refused to let illness stop him from performing or connecting with people. The emotional toll mirrored the physical strain. Elvis faced profound loneliness, personal disappointments, and the weight of living under constant scrutiny. The Bodyguard recalls nights when the king would sit quietly, staring out a hotel window, reflecting on life, love, and loss. These moments were poignant, revealing a man grappling with the complexities of fame and human vulnerability. Family remained central to his well-being. Elvis's love for his mother, father, and extended family provided emotional grounding, yet even these relationships were not immune to strain. The Bodyguard recounts instances where family disagreements, travel obligations, and the pressures of public life created tension. Despite this, Elvis remained deeply loyal and devoted, always striving to nurture those he loved. During these years, the king also grappled with personal loss. Friends passed away, relationships ended, and colleagues retired or moved on. Each loss, small or large, added to the cumulative weight on his shoulders. The Bodyguard recalls Elvis quietly mourning these changes, often in solitude, reflecting on the impermanence of life and the fleeting nature of connections. One particularly difficult period involved the deterioration of his relationship with management and the pressures to maintain an almost superhuman performance schedule. The Bodyguard notes that Parker's relentless focus on profit often clashed with Elvis's health needs. Conflicts about tour dates, contractual obligations, and public appearances intensified, forcing Elvis to make difficult choices that prioritized duty over personal wellness. The toll on his emotional health was compounded by isolation. Despite adoration from fans worldwide, Elvis sometimes felt misunderstood and alone. The Bodyguard explains that the public saw only the energy, the charm, and the glamour, but few perceived the emotional complexity beneath. He carried so much internally, he said. It was a constant struggle to balance personal need with public expectation. Late nights often involved moments of introspection. The Bodyguard remembers Elvis sitting at the piano, quietly playing or singing songs that reflected his inner thoughts and emotions. These moments were both cathartic and revealing, offering glimpses into a man navigating joy, fear, and uncertainty. Music became both escape and expression, a means to process the intensity of his life. The strain of physical and mental exhaustion manifested in other ways as well. Elvis's appearance began to change. Weight fluctuated, expressions sometimes appeared strained, and the sparkle in his eyes was occasionally dimmed by fatigue. The Bodyguard emphasizes that these changes were subtle but noticeable, especially to those who spent extensive time with him. Despite these challenges, Elvis maintained resilience. The Bodyguard describes how he would occasionally rally for impromptu performances, surprise fans with unannounced appearances, or create small moments of joy for those around him. Even when struggling, his commitment to others remained unwavering. He never let the world see his weakness, the Bodyguard explained. He gave his all, even when it hurt. Personal relationships provided both support and challenge during these final years. Elvis sought companionship, understanding, and trust, yet the pressures of fame complicated intimacy. The Bodyguard recalls private conversations where Elvis expressed frustration about being surrounded by people who sometimes sought self-interest rather than genuine connection. Yet he continued to nurture close bonds with a few trusted friends, family, and loyal staff. Health complications eventually escalated. Episodes of illness, exacerbated by exhaustion and medication use, became more frequent. The Bodyguard recounts nights when Elvis was visibly unwell, yet insisted on performing or attending public events. It was difficult to watch, he said. He was determined, but sometimes determination clashed with physical reality. In private, Elvis confided fears about mortality and legacy. He worried about being remembered accurately, about the impact of fame on those he loved, and about the sustainability of his career. The Bodyguard recalls listening as Elvis reflected deeply on life, acknowledging both triumphs and regrets, hopes and disappointments. During these years, Graceland remained a sanctuary. The Bodyguard describes how Elvis retreated there to find solace, away from the public eye, surrounded by family, memorabilia, and reminders of his early life. Even in decline, Graceland provided comfort, a place where the pressures of touring and performance could temporarily fade. Yet, despite sanctuary, the reality of declining health was ever present. The Bodyguard explains that each year brought new challenges: fatigue, medical concerns, and emotional strain. Touring schedules had to be adjusted and accommodations were made to protect Elvis's well-being. Still, the demands of fame often outpaced the care available, creating tension between necessity and desire. One vivid memory stands out: a night in Memphis during the mid-1970s, when Elvis collapsed backstage after a performance. The Bodyguard rushed to his side, ensuring medical attention and support. Elvis, ever gracious and resilient, insisted he was fine, brushing off concern, yet the Bodyguard recalls feeling the fragility beneath the public persona. He was strong, but he was human, he said. And that night it was painfully clear. The final years also highlighted Elvis's generosity and humanity. Despite illness and fatigue, he continued to care for others, support charitable causes, and engage with fans in meaningful ways. The Bodyguard emphasizes that even in struggle, Elvis prioritized others, demonstrating a commitment to kindness and connection that was rarely seen in public narratives. As the Bodyguard reflects on this period, he underscores the profound complexity of Elvis's final years. They were marked by brilliance, struggle, and resilience. The king navigated fame, health challenges, and personal pressures with courage, creativity, and grace. Yet beneath the sequins, stage lights, and charisma, there was a man wrestling with vulnerability, mortality, and the weight of extraordinary life. Ultimately, these years shaped not only Elvis's final performances, but also his enduring legacy. They revealed a man of immense talent, deep humanity, and remarkable perseverance. The Bodyguard's memories provide insight into a life lived at the intersection of legend and humanity, offering a rare and intimate perspective on the king's most challenging yet profoundly human years. The day of the farewell and reflections. After Elvis's death, the morning of August 16, 1977, began like many others at Graceland, yet none could have predicted the day's tragic significance. The Bodyguard recalls waking to an unusual stillness. In the house, a quiet tension that immediately signaled something was amiss. That day, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, passed away, leaving behind a void felt by fans and friends around the world. In those final hours, the Bodyguard describes the somber reality of being close to a legend. Elvis, who had lived under constant scrutiny and pressure, had finally succumbed to the accumulated weight of exhaustion, health struggles, and emotional strain. It was like watching a bright light slowly dim, the Bodyguard said. He was the king, larger than life, and yet suddenly he was just a man, and that man was gone. The Bodyguard recalls the chaos and grief that followed. Friends, family, and staff rushed to Graceland, each grappling with shock and disbelief. Fans began gathering outside the gates, unaware of the full reality, yet sensing the magnitude of loss. The Bodyguard describes the moment he had to confront the fact that Elvis would never perform again, never joke again, never share those private moments of music, laughter, and reflection. Even in death, Elvis's humanity shone through. The Bodyguard recounts the arrangements that followed, carefully coordinated, deeply respectful, and aimed at honoring a man who had given so much to so many. Funeral preparations, public announcements, and media coverage converged, yet behind the scenes, the focus was on preserving the dignity and legacy of someone who had touched millions of lives. In the days after Elvis's passing, the Bodyguard reflects on the overwhelming impact of grief. He describes sitting quietly in Graceland, surrounded by memorabilia, photographs, and personal belongings. Each object told a story. Each memory revealed another layer of a man who had been intensely private despite being world famous. Every room, every item, he said, reminded me of the depth, the complexity, and the brilliance of Elvis. The public reaction was unprecedented. Fans worldwide mourned, creating memorials, writing letters, and traveling to Memphis to pay tribute. The Bodyguard recalls the surreal experience of seeing thousands gather outside Graceland, their collective sorrow palpable. Yet even amidst this public mourning, he emphasizes that the private grief, the quiet, intimate sorrow of those who truly knew Elvis, was even more profound. Elvis's influence was immediately evident. Radio stations played his music non-stop, news outlets covered his life and legacy, and fans shared stories of how the king had impacted them personally. The Bodyguard notes that these stories reflected not just admiration for talent, but genuine love for a man who had inspired joy, empathy, and connection. In reflecting on those final moments, the Bodyguard shares personal recollections of conversations that now carry added weight. He recalls Elvis discussing his hopes, fears, and legacy, often in private, candid exchanges. These words, once shared quietly, became hauntingly poignant after his death. He wanted to be remembered for his music, his love, and the way he treated people, the Bodyguard said. Not for the fame, not for the spectacle, but for who he really was. The Bodyguard also recalls the emotional toll on family members. Grief was intense and all-encompassing. Gladys Presley, Elvis's mother, had passed many years prior, but the Bodyguard notes that Elvis's deep connection to her remained a constant part of his life. Similarly, friends and colleagues experienced profound loss, feeling the absence of someone who had been both a public figure and a private confidant. As the days passed, the bodyguard observed the rituals of remembrance and reflection. Personal stories were shared among staff and close friends, recounting moments of laughter, creativity, and care. Each memory painted a picture of Elvis beyond the stage, a man who loved deeply, laughed often, and faced life's challenges with resilience and heart. The bodyguard emphasizes that these reflections offered clarity about Elvis's true character. While the public knew him as the king of rock and roll, the private reality was more nuanced. He was complex, vulnerable, and profoundly human. These qualities, often hidden behind the sequins and spotlight, were revealed in the intimate moments remembered by those closest to him. One of the most enduring impressions, the bodyguard explains, was Elvis's unwavering generosity. Even in his final years, he remained devoted to those around him, family, friends, staff, and fans. Stories of his kindness, whether in private acts of giving or small gestures of thoughtfulness, became emblematic of the man he truly was. The bodyguard also reflects on the sense of responsibility he felt in preserving Elvis's memory. Having witnessed decades of life, struggle, triumph, and creativity, he understood the importance of sharing these stories. They were not merely anecdotes. They were the essence of a man whose legacy was too often simplified by fame, rumor, or spectacle. In recounting the day of Elvis's passing, the bodyguard recalls moments of profound silence and reflection. The music that had defined a generation continued to play in the background, yet now it carried a new weight. Each note, each lyric, became a reminder of absence, of a presence that had been larger than life but was now gone. Yet, in the grief, there was also a celebration of life. The bodyguard notes that Elvis's contributions, his music, performances, and personal connections continued to inspire. Fans found solace in memories, recordings, and the enduring spirit of the king. Even in death, his energy remained, the bodyguard said. His influence, his voice, his heart, they all endured beyond the final curtain. He also recalls the personal reflections he carried in private. Sitting alone at Graceland, revisiting decades of memories, the bodyguard thought deeply about what it meant to serve as a protector, confidant, and witness to one of the most extraordinary lives in history. These reflections were bittersweet, a mixture of pride, sorrow, and reverence. In the months that followed, the bodyguard continued to share stories with those closest to him, emphasizing the complexity and humanity of Elvis Presley. He spoke of the king's humor, generosity, creativity, and struggles, and he recounted tours, backstage moments, private conversations, and the pressures of fame that had shaped his life. These stories, previously confined to intimate circles, became a vital part of preserving an authentic understanding of the man behind the legend. The legacy of Elvis Presley, the bodyguard emphasizes, extends far beyond music. It is found in the lives he touched, the kindness he shared, and the humanity he exhibited even amidst extraordinary circumstances. His death marked the end of an era, but the essence of who he was continues to inspire, teach, and captivate people worldwide. Reflecting on that day, the bodyguard recalls one last private moment, a quiet walk through Graceland, surrounded by memories of past performances, laughter, and life shared with the king. It was a moment of connection, a personal farewell to a man who had been both a global icon and a profoundly human presence. I realized then, he said, that Elvis's spirit wasn't just in the music or the fame. It was in the way he lived, loved, and gave to the world. That is what endures. Through grief, reflection, and remembrance, the bodyguard underscores the importance of understanding Elvis fully, not just as a performer, but as a man of depth, vulnerability, and remarkable character. His final years, marked by struggle, perseverance, and generosity, provide a lens into the enduring power of resilience and the human capacity for love, creativity, and connection. Ultimately, the day of the farewell was both an ending and a beginning. It was a moment of profound loss, yet also a reminder of the enduring influence of Elvis Presley. The Bodyguard concludes that in remembering the king, we honor not just the public legend, but the private man, his struggles, his joys, and the extraordinary humanity that defined a life unlike any other. Legacy, influence on music, and closing reflections. Elvis Presley's death did not mark the end of his influence. It amplified it. The Bodyguard reflects that the king's legacy is measured not just in record sales or sold-out performances, but in the profound, enduring impact on music, culture, and the lives of millions around the world. From the moment he burst onto the scene, Elvis revolutionized popular music. His fusion of gospel, blues, country, and rhythm and blues created a sound that was at once familiar and entirely new. The Bodyguard emphasizes that witnessing this evolution firsthand was awe-inspiring. Elvis didn't merely perform music, he transformed it, infusing every note with emotion, energy, and authenticity. Artists across genres credit Elvis as a foundational influence. The Bodyguard recalls conversations with musicians who described how Elvis's daring, charisma, and vocal style inspired them to push boundaries in their own work. Rock, pop, country, and even hip-hop artists cite him as a trailblazer whose legacy transcends decades. He created a blueprint for performance, style, and creativity, the Bodyguard said. The ripples of his influence continue to shape music today. Beyond technical innovation, Elvis's impact was deeply human. His music spoke to universal experiences: love, heartbreak, joy, and longing. Fans connected with him not only as a performer, but as someone who expressed emotion in ways that resonated with real life. The Bodyguard recalls seeing audiences cry, cheer, and dance as one, swept up by the honesty and power of his performances. That connection, he said, was unmatched. It wasn't just the music, it was Elvis himself. Elvis's legacy also includes fashion, style, and cultural symbolism. From his iconic jumpsuits to his signature hairstyle, he became a visual icon whose influence extended far beyond the stage. The Bodyguard explains that every detail, from stage presence to costume design, was carefully curated by Elvis himself, reflecting his commitment to artistry and showmanship. Yet the Bodyguard stresses that the human qualities of Elvis, generosity, humor, vulnerability, are just as central to his legacy. Stories of charitable acts, kindness to fans, and loyalty to friends and family paint a picture of a man whose impact was felt deeply on a personal level. He gave more than music, the Bodyguard said. He gave love, laughter, and a sense of hope to countless people. Elvis's influence is also evident in global culture. His music crossed borders, languages, and generations. Fans in Europe, Asia, and Africa embraced the king with enthusiasm, finding in his performances a sense of excitement and identity. The Bodyguard recalls tours in which the reception was overwhelming, with crowds far larger than could be managed safely, yet filled with devotion and admiration. The preservation of his legacy has been deliberate. Graceland, now a museum and cultural landmark, serves as a repository for his life, career, and artistry. The Bodyguard reflects on his time there, noting the careful curation of memorabilia, photographs, and personal artifacts. Visitors today can witness the full spectrum of Elvis Presley, not only as a performer, but as a man whose life story is filled with creativity, struggle, and humanity. Music historians, biographers, and fans alike continue to explore the depth of Elvis's contributions. The Bodyguard emphasizes that understanding the king requires more than statistics or chart positions. It demands attention to his emotional intelligence, his artistry, and his personal resilience. Each performance, each recording, each private gesture adds a layer to the rich tapestry of his life. He also highlights Elvis's role in breaking social barriers. During a time of segregation and cultural division in America, Elvis's music drew from African American traditions and brought them to mainstream audiences. The Bodyguard recalls Elvis speaking with admiration for artists who influenced him, recognizing the value of cultural exchange and the importance of respect and appreciation. This openness contributed to a broader, more inclusive musical landscape. Even decades after his passing, Elvis remains a symbol of aspiration and creativity. Fans young and old continue to discover his music, inspired by his energy, style, and authenticity. The Bodyguard reflects on witnessing multi-generational fans coming together to celebrate the king, a testament to the timelessness of his artistry. "There's a reason he's still loved," he said. "His music, his spirit, his humanity, it's eternal." Elvis's story also carries lessons about the cost of fame. The Bodyguard emphasizes that while the public sees success, performance, and glamour, the personal toll can be immense. Elvis's life reveals the complexities of balancing talent, pressure, expectation, and human vulnerability. A narrative that continues to resonate for artists and fans alike. He recalls private moments of mentorship, where Elvis encouraged younger musicians, offering guidance, critique, and support. This generosity of spirit ensured that his influence extended beyond personal success, shaping careers and inspiring artistic innovation across generations. In closing reflections, the Bodyguard recounts personal takeaways from decades spent with Elvis. He emphasizes that the king's greatness was rooted not only in talent, but in integrity, empathy, and resilience. Elvis navigated immense challenges: health, fame, management conflicts, and personal struggles, yet remained devoted to music, fans, and loved ones. The Bodyguard urges fans to remember the man behind the legend. While stage performances, awards, and records are extraordinary, they are only one facet of a complex life. Elvis Presley was an artist, a friend, a family member, and a human being with hopes, fears, and dreams. These qualities, often unseen by the public, are what make his story enduring and inspiring. Finally, the Bodyguard reflects on the enduring power of music. Elvis's recordings, live performances, and personal creations continue to resonate, offering comfort, joy, and inspiration. "He gave the world a gift that can never be taken away," the Bodyguard said. And that gift lives on in every note, every fan, every memory of the king. In essence, Elvis Presley's legacy is multidimensional. It encompasses musical innovation, cultural influence, personal generosity, and the humanity that defined his life. The Bodyguard's stories, insights, and reflections provide an intimate portrait of a man whose life, though extraordinary, was profoundly human. As the narration draws to a close, the Bodyguard leaves a final thought for the audience: to celebrate Elvis not only for the legend he was, but for the man he remained behind the scenes. To honor his legacy, we listen, we remember, and we allow ourselves to be inspired by a life lived with passion, creativity, and heart. The king of rock and roll may no longer walk among us, but his spirit, music, and influence remain as vivid and powerful as ever. Through reflection, remembrance, and continued celebration of his artistry, Elvis Presley endures, not just as a cultural icon, but as a profoundly human story of talent, struggle, and enduring legacy.